Welcome to Love and Relo, the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, on this wonderful Monday, coming to you from the office. I got a great guest who was kind enough to come on from halfway around the world. Steve Burson, CEO of Relo Network Asia, is going to be our guest today. He's waiting patiently in the green room, eating all of our snacks. But before I bring him out, I want to go ahead and remind everybody about our book club book of the month. It's called White Fragility. You can buy this from Janet Webster Jones, who was on our show last week. She owns a black-owned bookstore in Detroit. It's a small independent bookstore. The book is called White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo is the author. If you want to order this, it is the most popular book in the country right now. On Amazon, it's #1, and they are often sold out. So if you want to buy the book, go to the phone number and the website below. Actually, skip the website, go right to the phone number, call Janet Webster Jones or her daughter Allison. They'll be standing by. They're wonderful people, and they will help you out. They'll get this book ordered right away. They'll ship it to you, and you get to support a independent bookstore. So I started this book over the weekend. It is, it's tough. It's tough, but it's good. It's important work, and I think right now it's really cool in our country right now that we are willing to engage in these conversations. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest today, Steve Burson. Steve, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
My book fell over. I feel like I got to prop my book back up. Steve Burson, CEO of Relo Network Asia. How are you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thanks very much.
Cool.
Thanks for having me here.
There we go. Yeah. And where are you coming to us from right now, Steve?
So I'm sitting in Singapore right now. We're 12 hours behind you, so we're just past midnight.
So it's noon here, and this is going to throw a lot of people off because I usually do this at 4 o'clock Eastern time in the U.S., but it's noon here, so people are going to be like, I was mowing my lawn, you didn't tell me you were going live, what's going on? Yeah, I'm talking to you, Jamie, out there in Mississippi, but it's actually what time there in Singapore?
Just past midnight, so yeah.
So you're being super gracious and actually staying up till midnight and just talking to me about Lord knows
yeah,
what.
although I do a lot of this, so my day is kind of tilted towards this sort of time zone. So I'm quite often having meetings at 10, 11, 12 p.m. So
it's normal
midnight.
for you. It's normal for you to be up in the middle of the night talking business.
It is a fairly regular thing. 3 or 4 times, well, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes 4.
I mean, just personal question. Does that like mess up your sleep schedule or like your personal life or like, how do you normalize that requirement?
No, and I'm kind of a night, more a night person than a morning person. So, I'm not particularly active really early in the morning. So,
okay.
It works for me as well. So
when you say you're not particularly active early in the morning, you make it sound like perfectly fine. When I say I'm not particularly active early in the morning, I sound like a loser who's not got his life together.
Actually, I exercise. I exercise in the morning, but I don't touch my email until probably 9 or 10 in the morning. So
okay.
I'm not like some people that are straight out of bed and into their email.
So what kind of a day? What kind of hours are you putting in then, Steve?
I guess a regular day is probably 10 to 12 hours, but that's the industry we're in. I try to be available for people, and I try to be available at times perhaps when my staff aren't so available, so that we can. I think response is a big thing in our industry to be able to respond quickly. So if my staff are responding to things during the day, then I want to be active, at a time when they're perhaps not around, to respond on their behalf. Yeah,
I agree with you 100%. Speaking of responsiveness, let's go ahead and check in with the folks here. Jamie Massler, there you are. Never disappoint me, Jamie. Hi, Ben and Steve. Cheers from hot Mississippi. Hey, Jamie. Brian Rivers, hi, Ben and Steve. First Tech Federal Credit Union checking in from the West Coast. Hey, Brian. It's good to see you, buddy. Francine Dresdy. Good morning, Ben, Janet, and Steve. Hey, Francine. Francine's so sweet. I love seeing her on here. Molly Feldman, hello from Jacksonville. Hey, Molly. Good to see you. Simon Scott, hey, Ben and Steve. Great to see you, Steve.
Thanks,
Simon? Yeah.
I do know Simon, yes.
Yeah. All right, awesome. And then we have a fellow Singaporean on here, Kerwin Guillermo. Hello from Singapore.
I saw a post earlier this evening from Kerwin. So
Kerwin's amazing. Do you
thank
know
you.
Kerwin? Have you had the opportunity to meet him at
No,
all?
I don't actually, but now that I've had the opportunity to meet online a little bit, it would be good to make his acquaintance.
I highly recommend him. He's got to be the busiest person in global mobility, and that includes myself. This guy, I mean, he works the kind of hours you're talking about, but he's also putting out content. He's also, the chair elect for Worldwide ERC. He's also on the corporate action committee for Move for Hunger, as a charity. I mean, and he's just mentoring
Wow.
people, and
Okay.
he takes an entrepreneurial approach to being an HR leader, to being a global mobility leader, and actually creating programs, creating content. I mean, just amazing guy. And I hope to come visit Singapore actually, and visit Kerwin, and maybe yourself.
Yeah,
Actually,
would love to have
Steve.
you here. Yeah.
Steve, let me ask you. While we're on the topic, if I came to Singapore, what would you for business, and of course, I'm a guy that likes to have a little fun. Not gonna lie. Not gonna lie.
Right.
But what kind of an itinerary would you put together for me, Steve?
For Singapore, there's quite a bit to see here. So it's a very how would I say, exciting sort of tourist location. So they've done a lot here for encouraging people to come here and have fun. So there's great zoos, there's great gardens, all sorts of things like that. There's a lot of heritage here too. So there's a lot to see in terms of architecture and that sort of thing if you're into that. And the nightlife, the night lights here are really quite superb. So I would probably take you out at night and show you some of the scenes and some of the night lights and some of the great restaurants and things that Singapore has. The food here is magnificent. They have everything from Western, Asian, anything you want. So
Love it.
yeah,
So we'd be like
not one of the cheapest cities in the world, but
Yeah.
but it's worth it. So
I'm just thinking of us out at night at Singapore. It's like 1 a.m. We're in like this amazing place, and we're just checking emails the whole time, and just getting back to our clients.
right.
Anyway, oh man. Anyway, that's
Mind
awesome.
you, there has been no eating in restaurants or anything like that for about 2.5 months now. So we've been down pretty hard, and they just announced today actually that they're going to open things up a little bit more on Friday. So the restaurants will be back open. Malls will start to reopen this coming Friday, so which is really good. Everybody's kind of in quite a happy spirits this evening. As I think the notice came out about 5 p.m. this evening. So
Yeah.
that's great to hear.
No, that is great. I actually ate in a restaurant for the first time in Michigan over the weekend with my family, and it's interesting here though. We open things up on a Monday, but nobody's trying to go to a restaurant on Monday. It's a lot smarter to open things up on a Friday when everybody's getting ready for the weekend. So hopefully, fingers crossed that everybody stays healthy, and we continue to curb the spread of COVID-19. Molly Feldman checking in. It's tomorrow already. That's a great analogy for life. It's like it's tomorrow already. And I think the speed at which the global mobility industry seems to be evolving, it does feel like it's tomorrow already. Casey Gale, good day from San Diego. Hey, Casey. Michael Cadden, hi from living abroad in Connecticut, USA at noon on June 15th. Getting very specific. Audrey D'Angelo, hi, Steve, checking in from Luxembourg. Hope you are well. Great to see you here.
Hi, Audrey. Great to see you.
That's great here. Elena checking in here. Greetings from Maryland. I love the global shows. Yeah, Elena, thank you for saying that. I mean, we've made an effort here to try to incorporate more perspectives from all over the world, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Asian take on global mobility, right? And I'd like to compare some of the things that you're seeing over there on, literally on the other side of the globe. And how does that compare to what we're seeing, from a U.S. based perspective? Because a lot of my European and Asian friends tell me how U.S. centric the program is. So it's always nice to test that with some outside viewpoints. So
Certainly.
I think let's just jump off there real quick. What are some of the hot and pressing issues that you're seeing right now from an Asian perspective in global mobility? What are some of the things that are out there and that are being dealt with as we speak, from your perspective?
I guess there's obviously a lot going on with COVID-19,
Mm-hmm.
and just when will countries open up their borders? How will they open that up? How will that affect sort of visa and immigration things? Is kind of the first step. Once we're through that, then it's kind of okay. So people are now going to be allowed to come in. How are we going to be servicing them? And
So
are we going to
where?
have
So
to,
let me stop you right there. Where is
sure.
Singapore right now in that
So Singapore
opening
is
back up?
almost completely locked down. The borders are shut, so they're letting people in for essential services and things like that. But basically, no foreigners are allowed in, and even people that have employment passes and things here and were outside of Singapore cannot come back at the moment. So when that's going to change, I don't know. If I left now, and my family's actually in Japan. If I left now, I wouldn't be able to come back in, and we don't know at what stage they're going to allow that to be, more flexible. Um,
Wow.
so, so I'm kind of waiting here. Typically, before, I was here for a couple of months at a time, maybe between 1 and 2 months, and then I'd be back in Japan for 2 or 3 weeks. So, I was seeing my family regularly. Um, that's obviously not been possible in the last 3 or 4 months.
So,
So I've
so
been
how,
here.
how long has it been since you've seen your family, Steve, in
So I
person?
left Japan in mid-February, and I haven't seen them since then. So,
Oh
and
my
I
gosh.
don't think I'm going to be able to get back to Japan any earlier than the summer. Maybe not even then. Um, so we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, obviously we're talking on Skype or Zoom, and it could be worse. There's so many more people that are in a worse situation than I am. Within this. So I think you've got to take that into context when you're thinking about things, and just try to do your best. I do have up and down days though. Some days are a lot better than the rest. Today was great because they announced that we can go out again on Friday. So
How are you managing that mindset? So I mean, you talk about that. And I think that that's a very real thing, and I think that was something I was struggling with when I was working from home. I struggle with it less now that I'm back in, and I don't know if that's the change in the way that where we are in the curve, or if that's because being in the office feels more normal, and therefore I feel less, I don't know, sometimes depressed or whatever you want to say. But how are you managing? How do you manage that mindset? With you and your staff, and I mean, I imagine you have a lot of people to consider. I mean, your family who's in Japan. How are you managing that
yeah,
mindset?
uh, it's not been easy, to be honest, and I've never been a person that's worked at home a lot. So this, I've been working out of my bedroom now for the last 2.5, going on 3 months. We went into work from home a little bit earlier than Singapore shut things down. So it's not been easy, and I do find it difficult to motivate myself at times. I find that exercise is important, so if I can get in the exercise in the morning, I generally feel a lot more positive about things, and can interact at a much better level. And then I think we just have to. We're running sort of daily meetings with our staff and that sort of thing. A little bit less frequently recently, but just to try to engage with them and make sure that everybody is okay. Make sure that any of their concerns or whatever, or that sort of thing are you know making sure that we're looking after those concerns, and also making sure that we're transparent about where we think we're going to be going with things. So we
Sure,
try to have regular meetings on what we're planning and what we know now, and what we would how we would like to be in a few months' time, and that sort of thing. So
awesome. We got some more comments here. Kathleen Allwine, hello from Fort Wayne, Indiana. Hey, Kathleen. Our friend William Keating. Hi there, Steve. Greetings from your former friendly competitor in Nagoya.
Hi, Will. Great to see you.
So Will was a friend. So Will was introduced to me by Jason Miller when he was living just
Right.
blocks away from my house, maybe a mile away from my house here in Michigan. And Will was on the show, I don't know, a couple months ago or whatever. And Will actually said, you got to talk to Steve Burson. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I reached out to Steve, and that's how Steve got here. So Steve was a referral
Yep.
from
So
Will.
thank you, Will.
But how did you guys meet? Tell me this story.
So we were competitors in Nagoya in the same market. So my family lives in Nagoya, and so I'm based out of that city, and that was where Will was for a good period of time. And we competed in exactly the same market. There were basically two companies in Nagoya that provided DSP services, relocation services. I was in one company and he was in the other. So we had a good, friendly, competitive, sometimes maybe a little bit not so friendly, but
I was going to say it's friendly because it's over, right?
Yeah, that's right. So now we're not competing. It's a lot better.
So you ran. So the story is you ran Will out of town. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to say so, but we all know that that's not true. Yeah, he knows.
He's not here to defend himself, so we can say whatever we want. It's just between you and me. Don't worry about it. Just between me and you. So that's cool. So I do want to ask you to talk actually about your relocation story. I want to get through and then bring it to present day. And I want to get through here our comments here. Sandra Clary, great topic. I've historically been blessed with really great APAC partners, internal and external. Yep. Lena Reckdahl. Hi, Steve. Nice to see you both there.
Hi, Lena.
Lynn Greenberg. Hi, Ben and Steve from New York Pivot app. Oh, look at this. Vivek checking in. Hi from New Delhi. See, I love it. See, when we do different times, we reach different markets. This is fantastic. Sandra Clary says, yes, the earlier Kerwin Guillermo Love and Relo broadcast is well worth a listen if it was missed. I think I missed half that broadcast myself, actually. As soon as Kerwin comes on, Kerwin's this amazing person, okay? He comes on, all right? I'm like, hey, Kerwin, my internet's been a little spotty. I don't know what's going to happen, but just, bear with me or whatever. We go live. It's like, hey, it's Love and Relo Voice. Boom, gone. Out, dead. I left him sitting in that chair you're in right now for 3 minutes with no me, and he's just like with
Right.
nothing but the compassionate comments of others. He was
hope that doesn't happen today.
I know. Well, you better work on your material because who knows, Molly Feldman, what travel restrictions? So Molly wanted to ask, and you touched on this a little bit, but what travel restrictions are you still facing in Singapore?
So basically, there are a few flights coming in. Singapore is accepting transit through Changi Airport, but no, basically no foreigners are allowed in. You can, if you have an employment pass or some other type of visa, you have to actually apply to MOM, which is the Ministry of Manpower, in order to they're prioritizing people to come in, basically. So you need to get approved, basically, to come in, and you'd either need to be an essential worker, or you'd need to have some sort of compassionate sort of grounds or whatever for them to issue issue you with authorization to come in. That might change over the next while, because there is a lot of people waiting outside Singapore to get back to their families here. So they will probably prioritize those people first, but I am still hearing that a lot of them aren't allowed in at the moment either. So that's where we are now. I don't really have any good idea about how or when that's going to change.
And how has that impacted mobility? I mean, is it just put it to a complete stop, or is there still workarounds and people effectively moving?
Yes, basically a complete stop, because until even now, and once we get to Friday, it's a little bit different. We can actually interact with people, but we have not been allowed to interact with people as a business until this Friday. So it's basically mean we have not been able to do very much. Now, there's a few people in country that we've helped with lease renewals. There's a few people that have moved in or moved out. We can't actually physically be there to help them with that, but we can coordinate and things like moving companies are judged as an essential service, so they can continue to do their work, but we can't be there to oversee anything or to be with our clients. Everything has been done virtually. So it's made it a little bit difficult. Different countries that we have 17 countries in Asia that we work in. So different countries are obviously at different stages. Right now we are pretty active in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan.
Okay.
So those three countries, although they're not accepting, Hong Kong is accepting foreigners and they do have to quarantine, but Taiwan and China still aren't. So we have a little bit more activity in those locations, but basically everywhere else is either locked down or their borders are closed. So one or the other, or both. So, and some of them are starting to come out of that now, but we still haven't seen the international travel start yet.
So again, Steve Burson, CEO, Relo Network Asia. So your company's in 17 countries. Are there any of the 17 that you're managing? Are there any that are, let's say, open?
So Hong Kong is probably the most open at the moment, in that you can go into Hong Kong. You do have to go into quarantine after you arrive. They test for COVID-19 on arrival.
Okay.
And then I think you're tested again at the end of the quarantine. So there's fairly strict procedures in place there, but you can can physically get into Hong Kong. That's not possible in most of our other locations right now, although it is beginning to change. So I imagine that within the next month or so, we'll start to see some change. There is now a bubble, a travel bubble between Singapore and China. So if you're doing business in between those two countries, you can apply to use that travel bubble. And you don't have to quarantine for that, but you do have to test on both sides. And then you have to wait for the test results, which often take 2 days or so to come out. So you would be kind of quarantined for those 2 days before the test results are, and obviously if they're negative, then you're okay to go and do work. But they also, make you stipulate exactly what you're going to be doing in the country. You have to, provide an agenda, what you're going to be doing for the period of time that you're in that other country, and things like that. So it is very, very rigidly sort of looked after at the moment.
Yeah, but that's interesting. So if you live in Singapore or you live in China, you could potentially, relocate or go on business to that country.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. And if you have questions right now, we got Steve here on the program. Go ahead and drop those questions in the comments. We will go ahead and ask all those questions, get you answers. So you have boots on the ground right now over there in Asia. If you want to ask him whatever questions you have there, we're gonna have some fun here. We're gonna talk a little bit also about some fun stories and things like that. So go ahead. Also, if you're watching this right now, we got about 17 people on LinkedIn right now, half dozen people on Facebook. If you're watching this right now, go ahead and hit that like. I haven't asked you to do that yet. Let's hit that like. Let's hit that round of applause button for Steve, okay? And let him know we're out there, and let everybody know that we are on and we are live talking about Asia and global mobility. Steve, I want people to understand also what Relo Network Asia is and does. So you talked about you're in 17 countries, but tell us what your company actually does.
So we're a destination service provider. So basically, we're at the end of the chain, if you like, in terms of having boots on the ground when people arrive in a country. We support them with our area orientations, finding a place to live, any sort of cultural tidbits or advice, that sort of thing. We help people get acclimated as quickly as possible to the new location. So our focus is enabling people to get to focus on their work without having to worry too much about what's going on at home, because we have that all sort of smoothly sorted out. Of course, on the way out of a country, we provide departure programs, help people to smoothly relocate out of the location. And then there might be some ongoing type services that we provide, like tenancy management, managing the rental payments of for people, or perhaps helpline type services, or there could be any number of other things that that people need on an ongoing basis, and we're always here if people have questions. Obviously, people go through things like the renewal of properties and things like that. So we're here to help with the renewal of their contracts and that sort of thing. And generally want to keep in touch with people as they go through their assignment. Typically, you'll find that people need us a lot at the start, and not so much as they get used to a location. So a lot of what we do is educating people on locations.
I was going to ask you, as a DSP. In Asia, what do you think what is the most valuable service you provide to a inbound, maybe expat from maybe, let's say, a Western country? What do you think the most important service?
It really depends on the locations, because in Japan, for example, where I've spent a lot of time, there is a reasonably large language barrier. So a lot of what we're doing is helping people because they can't communicate or can't understand the language. That's very different in a location like Singapore, where English is widely spoken. Everything is online. The country operates very smoothly. So our role here is very different. So it really depends on the location.
So that's interesting. So in Japan, language, but in Singapore, what would you say in Singapore?
So in Singapore, it's probably more about how to negotiate, for example, with owners or agents and that sort of thing. What the markets are like, and what the market norms are. What's standard in a lease contract. Those sorts of things. Providing people advice so that they don't get caught, in a contractual sort of situation and that sort of thing. There'll be some other sort of
I want to talk about that, though, because that's interesting, Steve. What are some of the things that aren't necessarily intuitive to an outsider about negotiating on a property in Singapore?
It's things like the period of time, that a lot of it's expectation management as well, or the period of time that you're going to be locked into a contract. How we can set up diplomatic clauses and things within that contract. What are standard things that you would negotiate in, and what are standard things that you would typically have to pay yourself. So, for example, here, air conditioning maintenance, for example, is something that a tenant is expected to pay. So trying to push that onto the owner is not something that you would typically be able to do here. But also, larger maintenance items are going to be, smaller maintenance items under a value of, 100, 150 Singapore dollars are going to be your responsibility, but anything over that is going to be the owner's responsibility. So, it's making sure that those things are set up in the contracts the way that they should be, in line with market norms. And that's what we do in all of our locations, is to make sure that people are getting a fair contract, and making sure that things are in line with market norms, and that the agent that they're working with is not trying to have them on for a little bit more commission, or conditions whereby later on they're going to find out that it's going to be difficult to get something fixed, or to get out of the lease later on when they need to.
So, Steve, here you are, CEO, Relo Network Asia. You got 17 locations or countries that you service throughout Asia. But how did you get here? Tell me, how did you get into mobility, and how did you end up here?
Quite a long story, but I'll try to shorten it as best as I can. So I'm originally from New Zealand, and when I was going to
say, you don't sound Singaporean.
No, and I'm not Japanese either. But so born in New Zealand, and spent first 20 years of my life basically in New Zealand. And when I was a kid growing up in a city called Christchurch, I used to see a lot of Japanese around, and tourism is a big industry for New Zealand. And looking at that, and looking at what my sort of school provided in foreign languages, I decided to take Japanese as a language in high school. So I actually learned Japanese for 5 years at high school, and then I also took it at university and majored in it as well. And in between high school and university, I did a 1-year exchange to Japan, which is where I learned a lot about the culture, and learned that the 5 years I had spent learning Japanese in high school meant basically nothing, because I couldn't understand anybody when I got there. So that was a terrific year that I spent there, learning a lot about the culture, learning a lot about the language. Came back, finished up university in New Zealand, graduated with a sort of honours in Japanese language and culture, and then went back to Japan again and did another year at Nagoya University in Japan. And so I had a really good base in terms of Japanese language and culture kind of before I started. And of course, the next step was to look at how I could work in Japan, because that's what now that I've been studying there for a long time. So I joined a program in Japan called the JET program, which is an excellent government program in Japan that the Japanese government has arranged to try to get more English teachers into Japanese schools and into Japanese government organizations. So I actually joined a city hall in just outside of Nagoya, where I worked for 3 years. This is also something Will, who introduced me to you, did a similar thing, working at a government office. And got a really good experience. I was basically interacting with the community, a lot of sort of English type programs that I was running, but also some international type programs and things like that. And it was really, really good for me to learn about Japanese school systems, and and that's where a lot of the psyche of the Japanese people sort of comes from. So it's really good education for me. And then, once that 3 years finished, I was looking for what would be the next thing to do. So having the Japanese sort of skill set, I tried translating for a while. Pretty quickly figured out that that's not for me, because it didn't involve people. And you're always translating somebody else's stuff. It wasn't your own, it wasn't your own work. So I pretty quickly figured out that that's not what I wanted to do.
So you actually had a desire to work more with people directly than just sit in front of the work and just translate stuff. Yeah, sure. Makes sense to me. I mean, I get that. So that didn't work out.
And a funny story. So the relocation company we have in Japan is called Relo Japan. And so after not being so happy at this translation company, I went for an interview at Relo Japan and didn't get the job. I'm now president of Relo Japan. But I was ill prepared, although I didn't think the interviewer did a great job either. So I when I didn't get the job then, I actually went to a moving company called Phoenix Transport, got a job there, and that was my first sort of step into this industry. So I worked for a moving company for Phoenix Transport for about a year and a half. And before I went back and had another interview with Relo Japan, and this time was successful in getting a job. And at the time I was in Tokyo. I moved back to
I'm still laughing. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm still laughing when you said you interviewed at Relo Japan, didn't get the job, and you're president of Relo Japan.
Right.
What is that like? I mean, can we just stop for a second and just unpack that scenario? Because I mean, I feel like some people must be pretty uncomfortable at this point at Relo Japan.
It's probably good for that person. By the time I joined Relo Japan, that person that interviewed me had already left, so it wasn't so awkward. But
Did they give you any feedback, or do you have any indication of why you weren't successful in your first interview?
Well, they did, and I was a little bit unprepared in that I didn't really know the industry that well, and so they asked me things about areas and things, and some of the things I couldn't answer and that sort of thing. So it was probably my fault for not being a little bit more prepared. But I still had the same energy then as I had kind of a couple of years later when I applied again. So
sure.
So
now you've been the president of Relo Japan for quite some time, and you've been with the company for 17 years. It looks like.
Yes. Yep. So I think it's 17, maybe going on 18 years that I've been with them now. Yep.
And so president of Relo Japan, which is basically a relocation company in Japan, right?
Yes.
Correct me where I'm wrong, okay? Because I'm not overly familiar, so I apologize. But then also Relo Network Asia, and that's a relatively newer endeavor.
Yes, it is. Yes. So I started off in Japan. So I joined the company in 2003, and we had 2 offices at the time. We've since opened another office in Osaka. So we have three cities in Japan: Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka slash Kobe, the two big cities that are kind of beside each other. And looking at that, they're the three biggest cities in Japan, but we probably would never have an office in any other location. The volume just doesn't demand it. So, in looking at sort of future opportunities, we felt that okay, now that we have three offices in Japan, probably the next step is to look at something in Asia. So our first step was actually I fell across an opportunity to set up a DSP business in Myanmar, which is the old Burma, as it was known,
Right.
back when the English were occupying it. So yeah, we set up a business in Myanmar back in, I think that was about 2014 when we started. That is still going today. And then in 2016, I had an opportunity to acquire what was the Orientations group of companies. So Lady Beverly Mayhew had a business across Asia, and she was looking to retire. And knowing her, I asked her one day, what are your plans? She said, I don't really have one. We got talking, and eventually we ended up in July of 2016, I think it was. We acquired her group of companies, which was a company in Hong Kong, a company in Shanghai, her company in the US, and a company in Singapore. And about half a year later, in order to kind of manage that acquisition, I handed over a lot of my Japan responsibilities to a gentleman, Bryce, who I've been working with for a long time in Japan, and I moved out here to Singapore to kind of look after this new Asia project in terms of 16 more locations across Asia.
Right.
So we acquired a business that was already active, and now the idea now is to try to grow that business out. And it was, there was two ladies, Adeline Chur, who's still with me today, and Beverly Mayhew, that were the main partners of the business previously. It was kind of like two sole proprietorships back then. So we're trying to put a little bit more, back-end systems, risk management, that sort of thing behind the business, and trying to grow it out more. So
it sounds like there's been a couple of acquisitions along the way, and you've kind of followed some opportunities as they've arisen. But I have to ask, I mean, here we are, at least from the U.S. perspective, and I want to kind of take this high-level strategic for a moment.
Sure.
So here we are in the U.S., and we are very concerned about the evolution of the industry, right? I mean, all these kinds of trends that are happening, whether it be work from home or there's immigration issues that are stifling, investment abroad and our ability to move talent. There's all sorts of issues, macro and micro, right? Country specific and globally that are impacting the industry, and I think that some folks are very hesitant to expand, to be aggressive in this market. What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about opportunities? How bullish, as we would say in the U.S., are you on this market? Where are the opportunities in your mind?
It's obviously very difficult to be too bullish right now.
I'm looking for hope, Steve. Give me some hope, Steve.
We wouldn't be doing that acquisition right now if it came along. But I think we just need to look longer term. I don't think our industry is going away at all. It's obviously going to be tough for the next 1 or 2 years. But we've been through that before. We've the Lehman shock times and that sort of thing. We've done it before. We can do it again. It's different this time, so we're going to learn different things. But I think we just need to think longer term, and take this opportunity to take the teachings that this gives us, and hopefully come out of this stronger than we were before. It's a little bit scary because globalization is taking a hit right now. Everything that this virus is doing is kind of pushing against that globalization sort of concept, if you like. It's kind of saying don't go there, that sort of thing. But I don't think that's the I don't think that's long term where we're going. I think it's teaching us some things. It's teaching us that we need to not take things for granted. Just the other day, I used to be traveling around Asia the whole time. I was basically never in one place more than 2 weeks. I'd be in Malaysia, or I'd be in Hong Kong, or I'd be back in Japan, or I'd be in Singapore, and traveling around. But I realize now that doing that, I was taking a lot of that, that travel and that ability to move around for granted. And was it necessary? Maybe not all of it. And so I think it's it started to teach us some things. So I just think we need to plan for the future. We need to plan for things coming back. I don't think this is going to change a lot of what we do, especially in our industry, being on the ground and providing services. If you ask any of our consultants now, I don't think they're going to say to you that they can provide a better program now because it's virtual, because it's contactless. I think we lose the ability to provide a lot of good value when we're not face-to-face with people. So I don't think that that's going to go away in the longer term. But we need to, in the shorter term, perhaps adapt the way that we're doing things so that people are feeling comfortable in the way that we provide services and feeling safe and that sort of thing. But I think, as time goes by, I think that's going to fall away, and you're going to find that some of the virtual things that we're doing virtually are going to remain, but a lot of things are going to go back to the way that we provided them before. I do think that things like Core Flex and that sort of thing, the core set of services, the flexibility that we need to have around the other set of services that we provide. I do think that needs, and we're going to be forced to do that over the next while as well, is to be incredibly flexible with everybody's, moves, because it's going to demand that, and it's going to be a case by case thing. Everybody's not going to be in the same situation. So I think that core, providing those core set of services, the visa and immigration, the lease checks, those sorts of things, plus giving some flexibility around the other services that we can provide, and companies are going to perhaps offer, and allow their assignees to choose a little bit more about how they want what's important to them, and how what they want to put in their programs.
I think that's a great point you bring up, Stephen, and I think so. I'm in household goods moving, and some people would think that we're a core, undoubtedly core benefit, but we are oftentimes finding ourselves more and more often having to justify our own existence in the relocation process. Yes. So as a DSP, which I think is undoubtedly valuable, but it's sometimes not obvious to people outside the industry of the value. And as the decisions are being made more and more by HR generalists and transferees who maybe have their own, who are kind of in charge of their own budgets or their own cafeteria menu of services they're going to choose to use, how does the DSP articulate their value in this kind of a shifting decision-making process?
I think that's one of the things, is that, I think as an industry, we need to get better at selling our services to the end user. Right now, we sell our services to a relocation management company, so we're not selling them to the end user.
Right.
The relocation management company is then selling them on to the corporate company, the corporation, but they're not the end user either. So a lot of our terminology, a lot of the way that we explain our services is set up in a corporate type of way. We understand it, but to the end users don't. So I think we're going to need to adapt the way that we explain our services, how we navigate people through the different kinds of services that we can offer, or the different things that we can help them with. And some of that's going to be we're going to need to use technology to do that, because it's not going to be financially beneficial for us to be on a phone explaining to somebody what our services are and then getting them to choose from it, because that's going to be there's going to be too much cost involved in doing that. So that sort of thing really needs to go onto a platform. People can navigate easily through it, see what is actually available. I like that. I think I'm going to need some help with that. click on that, put it in your shopping basket, and once you've paid for those services, then that order comes through to us, and we engage with you, etc. So it's going to be a sort of a combination of the core and the flex and that sort of pay for some of the things yourself, or pay for some of the things yourself from the money the company gave you, or the company pays but you get to choose, or those sorts of things.
What do you think about that flexibility in the benefit structure nowadays? It used to be back in the day, right? You get a relocation benefit, it included all these things.
Right.
This is your package. And now it's here's a check, or now it's here's a variety of services. Yeah. You feel like you're at the sushi bar, right? And you're just, I want this, I want this, I want this.
Yeah, no, I guess the thing is that a lot of the time, and this is true for anything that you haven't experienced before, right? Is a lot of the time people don't know what it is they actually need. Yeah. They think they do, but they perhaps don't know. And so I think that that sometimes that's where we've got to educate people on. What is got to be in that core sort of package, because that's the things that they really need. Whereas, the flexibility, but explaining the difference between the flexible items too is important, so that they can understand what their priorities are going to be.
If you go into a restaurant with the idea you want a hamburger, you're gonna have one experience. But if you go into a restaurant and you ask the chef, what's the best thing on the menu? What is the thing that you are uniquely famous for? And you have that thing for dinner, you're going to have a whole nother level of experience. And I think that there's just a lot of opportunity in the employee experience that's being left on the table when we no longer get to curate that experience for them, but they come in and then they drive the process. So I hope if there's corporate mobility people out here watching this, I hope that they get some of that. Now that might just be me, and it might just be my uninformed perspective, but I think that there's a lot of value. I mean, you've been doing this for 20-something, 30 years or something, right, Steve? I mean, you probably know what's going to work, right?
Well, I know some of the time, not all of the time, and one of the things we need to be doing better as service providers is actually really listening to what people are wanting. And sometimes we kind of put people in a box. This is the services I provided to that guy, so for this lady, I'm going to provide the same services. And that's not necessarily the way that we need to be thinking. So we need to train our people to really listen to what people are wanting and that side of things. So I think there's learnings to be had on both sides.
Excellent point. Sandra Clary kind of supports that as well. For those who have never experienced these kinds of assignments and relocations firsthand, there is a challenge in fully understanding the value in DSP support. And then she goes on to say, I mean, first let me ask you to respond to this. I mean, do you get people that they're like, oh, we're gonna put you in touch with our DSP, and they're like, DSP, what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, that happens. And once again, there are lots of different people. There are first-time assignees. There are assignees that have done a number of different assignments, and some people are very experienced, expats, and they perhaps don't need the same amount of help. That being said, being an expat in one country doesn't actually mean that you know everything when you're going into a new country. It means you know what you need to know, but you don't know it yet, and it could be very different. And that's the thing with Asia is, people tend to put Asia in sort of one, it's Asia. There's one way of doing things. There isn't. We're in 17 different countries, and there's more than 17 different ways that those countries operate. It's in China, for example, it goes city by city. Things are not the same in Shanghai as they are in Beijing. And go to another, big first-tier city, they're very, very different. Go to a third-tier city, and it's completely different. So, it's understanding that, and the nuances that come with each location. I do have a question for you, Ben. I love the way that you have love in your love and relo title. But I was just thinking, in a lot of the relationships that I've experienced, there's always kind of a pecking order, if you like. There's always there's a corporate client, there's an RMC, there's and we tend to be right down at the bottom on the ground.
At the bottom, keep going.
So, there's a lot of pressure in these relationships, right? And this industry is fun to be in, but sometimes it's not, right? Because people put a lot of pressure on each other. And I'm just wondering, how as an industry can we perhaps be a little bit more loving about the way that we interact with each other, even though, you're my client, and, for them, their client is up here, and that sort of thing, because we do place a lot of pressure on each other. And I see that in the pressure that our consultants face, in providing the services. They're under a lot of pressure to perform every day. And when they don't, it can sometimes be overwhelming. And we've got to look pretty closely and carefully at sort of mental wellness and that sort of thing. And I think COVID has perhaps highlighted that a little bit more. So I don't know how do you think about how we can manage the pressure a bit more?
So I think I'm a service provider also, and we have move coordinators, right, who are oftentimes probably in very similar situations as your staff. And oftentimes they're dealing with a middleman or two in the process, between them and the actual employee who's moving, right, and that we're trying to provide service to. And I think that a lot of times the pressure that you're describing is from misinformation and lack of context. And when I say misinformation, that happens when we play the telephone game, right? And I tell you something, you tell Janet something, Janet tells Sandra something, and it's very likely to be different. Especially when I put my own little agenda and spin on it, right? Because I'm the transferee and I'm trying to get a little bit better benefit, or I'm trying to get a rebate or credit on my move or whatever. I have an agenda, right? And so I'm skewing the story, right? And then it gets skewed by somebody else's agenda, and then it gets skewed by somebody else's agenda. And I think where it's important, so it's important to deal as closely with the person whose experience it is as possible. So if it's the transferee, or the corporation or whatever. The second thing I would say is the context piece. I think context is important. The biggest context thing that we can do is relationships. And the reason I do this show, one of the reasons I do this show is I want to showcase relationships. I want to showcase people and help people build relationships with those people. And so I think once you have that relationship and therefore you have context, then you do something that Julie Kratz, author of Lead Like an Ally, says, is you assume positive intent. Yes. So now if, I'm using your company and I hear, something kind of squirrely like, wait, Steve said what? Like, Steve did what? No. Right. Now I can say, how dare he? I'm going to fire him. Or I can say, that doesn't sound like Steve. That doesn't sound like something he would say, And I'm a big fan of the saying, live your life in a way so that if someone says something bad about you, other people wouldn't even believe it. And so I think it's important for us to get to know one another, because so many times these authorizations come over and they're forwarded and re-forwarded and sent through, and all the context and all the people, relationship, love, the warm and fuzzy, right? It's all lost, right? Lost in translation, lost in forwarding, lost in, API somewhere. And so one of the things I like to do is when I get a transferee, I like to look them up on LinkedIn. I like to look them up on LinkedIn and just say, just give me a picture. Give me a little bit of a bio. Let me understand your story. Where'd you go to high school? Give me a vibe here, And then I'm like, okay, now with that vibe, I can at least go into my first conversation with them saying, I don't know you, but I think I might understand you a little bit. Oh, you're an engineer. Oh, you're from the southeastern United States. Oh, you studied this in college, Oh, okay, you're actually a person now. You're not just a name, So I think understanding, getting past the name and taking the time to actually meet people. And what's cool now is I'm having a conversation with a guy in Singapore, right? Who Will might have told me about over a drink one time, but I would have never met you. Right? And so now here we are. And now I go to Singapore. I can call you. I'm like, hey, Steve, I'm in town, man. Let's go out. What's up? And he'd be like, all right, we'll go out. I got to write some emails while we're out, but I'll go, And we just have a great time, And I think, and that's, I think, how relationships are built, how context is gained, and I think how we can be truly effective next level business leaders. So it's a great question.
Yeah. I would agree. Trust in your partners, and we enjoy working the most with people that trust us in what we do, and that trust needs to be built, and you can't do wrong by it. But it is. I think trust
Yeah.
is very important.
Yeah, it is. Oh, Janet's saying she does the same thing. Look at the person on LinkedIn. Yeah, it's funny, right? It's easy to find people on LinkedIn. It's hard to find them on Facebook, but even just finding them
Right.
on LinkedIn is like that's good. I get who you
Yeah.
are. Priyamvada says hi, Steve. Katie Linehan says individualizing the user experience is key. Sandra goes on to say a great example of why stories are so important, detailing the value versus the lack when the services weren't offered. She's talking about
Yeah.
the DSP and how to be an advocate
Yeah.
for your own service
Yeah.
vertical. Have you found
Telling
that telling
stories.
stories is
Yeah, telling stories about successful relocations is that's a good way to get the value across, I think. Yeah. And
yeah, I
then
think so
telling
too.
stories about other assignments which might have failed because that support wasn't there. So that's a good way of showing the value.
Tell me a funny story. Tell me a funny story of something you've learned in this business, managing, multiple countries and everything, and your staff and everything. What are some of the things that might have happened over the years that you did not see coming?
I mean, there's just a lot of funny stories from our assignees. Sometimes they do things that are, you wouldn't expect. I've had people, being angry about their shipments not arriving quickly enough and demanding that I call the captain of the ship to ask him to speed it up and things like that. Just some things that really make you laugh. But one of the things that we can laugh about now in hindsight in Japan is our staff in Japan are 70 to 80% female, and there's a reason for this. Basically females tend to be better in terms of language ability or the willingness to communicate in different languages. So Japan has a large language barrier, and of course all of our staff need to be bilingual, fluent in Japanese, and either a foreigner fluent in Japanese or a Japanese person who's very fluent in English. So typically 70 to 80% of our staff are Japanese, and 70 or 80% of those people are female. So we have a lot of female consultants, and we've had a bit of an issue in the past with our consultants ending up going out with and then marrying our clients. And this has happened
Really, that's interesting.
not just once or twice. This has happened multiple times, and we've even talked internally about maybe we need to put together some sort of matchmaking service or something for our clients and our employees or something, and try to monetize this a little bit, because in the end they get married, and they typically it's typically a foreign assignee marrying our Japanese a Japanese female in her 20s or 30s, and they end up going back to the assignee's country. We lose them as an employee, and they gain them. So
but at least you get at least you're getting a good customer satisfaction survey out of the deal.
Well,
I mean,
yes.
I don't know if you can trade employees for satisfaction surveys. I don't know how long that'd last, but no, that's got to be frustrating, right?
Yeah. So. That's one of the things that in hindsight we can laugh about, and so I now have a lot of our ex-employees who are married around the world to different folk in Europe and the Americas, and
do you at least get invited to the wedding?
I have done to some, not to all, but typically if they've gone back home to their home countries to get married, then it's sometimes difficult to attend those. But
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, that is funny. That is funny. I don't know if that's a service you should advertise or not, but I mean, it's definitely
it's definitely a benefit of working for our company. If you're looking for that, elusive foreign spouse.
What the elusive? Oh my gosh! I'm gonna get some notes about this one. I can tell already. No, this is great. This is a lot of fun. This is really fun, Steve. I appreciate you sharing all this with me. I wanted to give you kind of the last word here as we come to a close here, and I want to thank everybody who chimed in, and we probably have time for one more question if anybody wants to chime in. But Steve, what are some of the things that folks should know coming from your perspective here? I want to give you the last word. what's something people should know or should consider?
About services in Asia, I guess it's the thing I just mentioned before, in that Asia is actually a very diverse place, and that each country, each city has its own nuances. So not to take everything for granted, not to generalize, too much, and to seek help from people like myself or people in my organization that can help people kind of understand the context or the culture that they're going into. So it's very, 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 very different. And I'm still learning as well. And that's the thing that people, I think, need to understand, is that you never learn it all. And I've spent 3.5 years out here in Singapore, and I'm still learning about the Singapore location and the culture and the people and the way to do things here. And I'm learning about other countries every other day as well. And it's a continual, and even Japan. I mean, I lived in Japan for 23 years before I came here. I still don't know everything about Japan today. There's still things I struggle with because of my cultural background and a very different culture that Japan is. So I think just being open to learning, open to listening, open to watching. I learned a lot about Japan just by watching what people do and following what they did, right?
Right.
To try to do things in the way that they do them. But it is, you can't, you need to continue to be yourself, but at the same time you need to be very aware that that you're in a country that's not your own, and that you need to try to follow some of those cultural norms as best as you can, and at least look like you're trying to adapt, because then you'll be accepted a lot more for that sort of that behavior.
It's a great tip. Try to adapt. Janet had a question here. Last question here. What is Steve's favorite part about living in Asia?
I think it must be the food. I love Japanese food. I love Asian food. Not to say I don't like Western food. I like all food. But I think just the variety of food that you can get here in Asia is just outstanding. Some of the different flavors and that sort of thing. And then, put a beer or a wine or a Japanese sake or whatever with that. And, I'm not one to miss a good drop of alcohol. So I think that's what I like about alcohol the most. Yeah. It's the food in Asia.
That's what you like about alcohol, the most food in Asia. So this has been wonderful, Steve. I've learned a lot. You've given me a lot to think about as well. I think your point about taking a whole continent and saying, oh, Asia, it's all the same. That would be silly just in the United States, much alone North America, much alone Europe. So I think we have to be very careful about just kind of generalizing and stereotyping a culture. Yes. or whatever. China itself is enormous, and like you said, first tier, second tier cities are very different. So this has been wonderful. I really appreciate it, Steve. Everybody that chimed in today, thank you so much. Actually, Paul had a quick one. I'll give it to Paul. Paul says, "Great to see you, Steve. What's a tenant?" I think
that's Paul. Yeah, taking my New Zealand accent. That would be a tenant. Yes.
Yeah. That's great.
Thank you, Paul.
Then, Lorena's greetings from Germany. Yeah, Paul. It's always good. That's how you know who your friends are, when they come and they mock you publicly. That's how you know. That's how you know you have buddies out there. Molly says, "Thank you for the presentation. Soledad Aguirre, gracias from your fan in Madrid." Thank you, Soledad. Appreciate that. Jamie, thank you, Ben and Steve. Love Singapore. It is very glamorous. You're glamorous, Jamie. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to say thank you to everybody who was tuning in. Tomorrow we have Horst Gallo, Vice President of Global Mobility at IBM. So he's going to come on and talk to us about going from tactical to strategic. Really looking forward to that. Also, if you haven't had a chance to pick up the book yet, White Fragility is the book club book of the month. We are reading this right now. Trying to look at our own biases and unpack those things. If you need to know how to get a hold of it, it's at the bottom. You can email that Gmail. You can call that phone number, talk to Janet Webster Jones or her daughter Allison. They will sell you this book. It is the #1 seller in the United States right now on Amazon. It is sold out. So if you want to get this book and read this book before our discussion which I believe is going to be like first week of July, then holler at the Source Booksellers in Detroit. Thank you so much again, Steve. I really appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. See you tomorrow.